Today we're really excited because we're going to be talking to basically a rock star in the world of psychology. It's Dr. Paul Gilbert, and we're going to be talking to him about what we can do to reduce our self-criticism and reduce how hard we are on ourselves. Paul, why have you spent the last 20 years of your career focusing on self-criticism?
Well, it's a very good question, Alistair. The fact of the matter is that many people have problems with self-criticism.
What's actually wrong with us criticising ourselves?
Well, there's nothing wrong with you criticising yourself. The key issue in criticism really is the emotion that goes with it. Okay, so if I can give you some examples to show you that what goes through your mind is very powerful in how it affects your emotions and your body. If you're very hungry and you see a meal, this will start your stomach acids and saliva going. But equally, if you just fantasize a meal because it's late at night or you haven't got any money, that fantasy will also stimulate your stomach acids. So the image and the real thing can stimulate the same brain systems. If you see something a bit naughty on television, late at night perhaps, that will stimulate your pituitary, which will release hormones into your body to give arousal. But equally, of course, we all know that we can just fantasize naughty things and do the same thing to our bodies. So this is very, very important to recognize that what you think about and the fantasies and images you dwell on are going to have a very powerful influence on how your brain works and how your body works. By analogy then, if you are focusing on yourself as being no good or inadequate, or you're generating quite a lot of anger or disappointment to yourself, that is going to be stimulating your stress system. And the problem with people who are self-critical is that day in, day out, they're stimulating their stress system, okay? And if you keep doing that, sooner or later you're going to just feel beaten down, harassed, no good, worthless, useless, inadequate. So we make a distinction between two types of criticism, if you like. One that's based upon this frustration and anger and annoyance. But there's also what we call compassionate self-correction. Now, compassionate self-correction is where we actually embrace our mistakes as best we're able. We kind of try and get over the frustration of making a mistake or doing something wrong as quickly as we can and focus on what we can learn. So the idea is that we want to be at our best. We want to be the best we can, as opposed to just punishing ourselves and beating ourselves up when things go wrong. So the key issue really is learning that when things go wrong, how do you treat yourself? Because if you just whack into yourself, become very angry, very critical of yourself, you've now got two problems. One is the problem of the thing itself that's gone wrong, that you're going to be upset about, of course. And the other is that you're now really pushing your stress system into overdrive with all of this attacking that's going on. Just in the same way as your fantasies will push you physiologically into certain positions. So that's the reason why self-criticism that comes with anger and frustration is a bad thing. But of course, the ability to recognize when you've made a mistake and to improve next time, that's a good thing.
Do a lot of people use it for that strategy then? They're using self-criticism to actually improve and stop themselves making a mistake?
Yes, in fact, we've done some research on this. We find there are two types of self-criticism. One is people criticize themselves because they feel that will stop them from making mistakes. And you know, we grow up in a society where we believe that if you've made a mistake, you need to be punished. There's an awful lot of that in Western society. You don't get it so much, interestingly enough, in the more Eastern societies. But certainly in Western society, error and punishment go together very much in the way in which Westerners think. And so there is this belief that if I punish myself enough, I'll stop myself making mistakes. So if I frighten myself enough, I'm not going to make mistakes. That's one type of self-criticism. There is another type, however, which is more damaging and is associated with more serious mental health problems. And this is for people who actually hate themselves. So they're not being critical because they think, I made a mistake, I shouldn't have done that, I've got to improve. It's really because they really have contempt and hatred for the self. Now that type of self-criticism is very bad, and that's associated with quite serious mental health problems. Carrying the self-hatred is difficult for people.
Okay, so you could sort of talk about self-criticism as being on a spectrum. from sort of minor self-criticism to actually more severe.
It is on a spectrum, but also the emotions that are involved in the self-hatred, self-criticism are slightly different. You have a more of a contempting, aggressive form of self-criticism. I mean, I sometimes use an example with my patients. I can remember one day I was very tired and I drove home and I missed my drive and just clipped my garden wall. So bashed in the front of my car and knocked my wall down. Now, I was incredibly cross about that. Of course you would be, right? But the point is, the idea is to get over that crossness as quickly as you can, to realize that, you know, you have made a mistake. It is your responsibility, okay? That's important. But if you just keep beating yourself up on it and then hating yourself for what you've done and all the problems you've caused yourself, it isn't really going to help you. It's just going to make you feel more depressed and upset and more anxious about what you've just done. So that's important. So learning that if you just hate yourself, really you're creating an internal environment within yourself where it's very difficult to feel anything else except anxious and depressed.
How does, when we compare ourselves to other people, a lot of people compare themselves, don't they, to somebody who they think is more successful or better looking or richer or whatever. Yeah. Often, we do compare ourselves to other people. How does that sort of fit in with self-criticism?
Well, I think it's an extremely interesting point, this, because there's been changes in the way in which we compare ourselves. Up until about the 20th century, really, people kind of accepted that their position in society was ordained by God. Okay, so if you were a pauper, then you were a pauper. If you were a king, you were a king. And it wasn't really your responsibility to turn yourself from a pauper to a king, basically. What's happened with the development of capitalism really is that everybody now has an opportunity. So in America, there's the view that everybody is potentially capable of being president. Okay,
right, yeah.
Sometimes it happens, but given the size of the population, the success rate is not so high, is it? But what capitalism requires you to do is to be a competitor, to enter the market, to try and improve yourself, to buy more, have more, do more, because that's what it requires you to do. And that's certainly how people tend to think about themselves. So they don't just compare themselves and say, oh, well, isn't that, they're good and I'm okay here. But if they're good, I should be more like that. I should be better. I should try and improve myself this way. And you certainly see this with magazines for young women, of presenting these kind of images of these thin young girls, and then all of the many of the people in that cohort will try and sort of copy that. The other interesting point about the escalation of social comparison and then feeling inadequate if you're not up to the mark, because we now don't believe it is God, we believe it's us. If we're not up to the mark, it's our fault. So our society tells us that now, is the fact that in the last 10 years, certainly television and the media have focused more and more on losers. So there are various programs that I won't mention, but the idea is who are we going to check out this week? Okay.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at competitions in, say, the 50s and the 60s, everybody used to focus on the winners, and all the losers would hug each other, go down the pub and commiserate. But now the programs are drawn out week by week, focusing on the losers. It's the losers we follow, watching them cry, become angry, blame the judges or whatever it is. This, I think, is a problem, really, because it actually sets up a kind of an emotional tone in society about what it means not to be good enough. And we suspect, we don't have any data, but we suspect that all of these factors, the way in which children are more and more evaluated now with stats, the way in which their television programs are orientated, the way in which markets are constantly focusing on them and getting them to compare so that they will buy products and all that. All of these factors together are probably having quite a pernicious effect on our social comparison. So we don't compare like we used to, we compare and end up feeling failures and useless and so on.
So we're comparing ourselves to sort of unrealistic people that we can't possibly hope to be.
Yes, unrealistic, and also the fear is that if you're not up to the mark, then out you go.
Yeah.
Out you go. You're not wanted. Sorry, but you're not wanted,
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and we've actually done some research looking at people who strive to avoid inferiority. okay, which is different from striving for superiority. And a lot of the reasons people are very competitive and are striving is because they feel if they don't, they will be rejected or marginalized or passed over or left behind.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not even active rejection, it's the feeling that actually people will say thank you very much, but not today, goodbye. So this sense of not being included, not being wanted, unless you're up to it, this is quite a powerful belief system in people, I think.
Yeah.